In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. We'll move to questions now. And I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the Coalition strongly supports the cashless debit card for welfare payments to working-age recipients where alcohol and drugs are a problem. Research from the University of Adelaide showed that the cashless debit card led to a 21% decrease in gambling and 45% of people believed it had improved their lives. Prime Minister, to please an inner-city woke audience, you've abolished the card. As Jacinta Price points out, it will result in higher instances of domestic violence and assault in Indigenous communities. Why make a bad situation worse?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and I will also ask the Minister to supplement my answer. We went to the election with a very clear position of abolishing the cashless debit card, and we did so. We did so because of the impact that it had on a part of privatising the welfare system, whereby for the first time we had a welfare system that was paying a private company to engage in activity with profit motive, and which was resulting in, as well, issues being imposed on communities and on individuals without them having any say in that. One of the things that we have done is to make sure that we're about empowering communities, not taking power away from them. That is an important distinction between our attitude and the attitude of those opposite. Not a patronising position that says we know best, not one that extended the cashless debit card into communities. It wasn't just in Indigenous communities, was imposed on other communities as well, and that is why we went to an election with a very clear position, and we stand by that, and that's why we'll be legislating to achieve our objective. I'd ask the Minister to also comment.
Order.
Of course, the Leader of the Opposition hasn't quite got his correlation and his causation right. He just said that the University of Adelaide report led to a change. Now, I'm going to quote from the University of Adelaide report.
Order. The Minister will resume her seat. I'll call the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order. The Minister has been going for 8 seconds.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, I'm not interested in causation. I'm interested in reducing domestic.
There's no point of order. Resume your seat. The Minister was referring to the report when you took the point of order. I call the Minister.
I will answer the question. So those opposite have insisted the University of Adelaide report in January supported the cashless debit card. What they have failed to point out is that the evidence was inconclusive. The study found that any reduction in alcohol and drug use could not be directly attributed to the effect of the card. They failed to acknowledge that the report found that the cashless debit card introduced widely felt and costly hurdles to many participants in relation to financial planning and money management, and that a large proportion of CDC participants reported their quality of life was affected in a negative way. Of course, that was the University of Adelaide report. Of course, we've got this ANAO report, which the Minister has failed to listen to either. And I'll go to the conclusion that the most recent ANAO report has said, and that said that it did not demonstrate that the CDC program is meeting its intended objective. Need I say more?
I give the call to the member for Moreton.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Given the growing challenges facing Australia's economy, how is the Albanese Labor government responding?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Moreton for that question. It's an honour to serve the southern suburbs of Brisbane with the member for Moreton as we try and get our communities and our country through what is a difficult period for the national economy. This side of the House is confident that Australia and Australians can weather the storm that we're going through right now when it comes to this combination of economic conditions. but that begins with acknowledging the particular combination of challenges that we now confront that present them to us. And that begins, of course, with taking the Australian people into our confidence about what's happening in their economy right now, what it means for them, and what this side of the House has begun to do about it. And the statement and the updated forecast that I provided the Australian people through their parliament today, we're honest and upfront about that combination of challenges. We do have high and rising inflation. We do have rising interest rates. That, combined with the impact of a slowdown in the global economy, is slowing our own economy, and that will have implications for unemployment as well. And so our economic situation is confronting. Our economy is growing, but so are the challenges to that economy. And that's why the economic plan that the now Prime Minister, the now Finance Minister and myself took to the Australian people is now more important than ever. It has at least three parts. The first part is to provide responsible, long-term cost of living relief to people who are doing it tough, particularly when it comes to areas like childcare and medicines and getting wages moving again, particularly for the lowest paid in our community. The second part is to make sure that we are growing our economy the right way and making it more resilient by investing in skills, investing in cleaner and cheaper and more reliable energy, investing in a future made in Australia, all of those important elements of our plan. And the third part is to deal with the legacy of rorts and waste, which has given us a budget which is heaving with $1 trillion in Liberal Party debt and nowhere near enough to show for that generational debt without a generational dividend.
Order. What? I'll just ask the Treasurer to resume his seat. I'll give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, we've now got the Treasurer launching into an attack on this side.
What is your point of
order? The point
order?
of order is relevance. The question did not contain any reference to alternate approaches, and even when questions have contained references to alternate approaches,
order. The member for
speakers
Moreton
have said that there is a restriction on what the Minister at the box can cover. So he needs to stick to the question.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House. I'll call from the
Thanks
Leader of the
very
House.
much, Speaker. I just draw your attention to the opening part of that question, which is given the growing challenges facing Australia's economy. I reckon $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt counts as that.
Order. Order. Resume your seat. Resume. The Manager of Opposition, what is the point of order? You've had one on relevance. What is the point of order? There's no point of order. I give the call to the Treasurer, who will remain relevant to the question.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The point I'm making is this. A lot of the challenges that are in our economy have been around for a long time, for the best part of a decade, and they will take more than 9 weeks for us to clean up the mess that those opposite have left us. But the hard work of implementing our economic plan has begun. We want to bring Australians together around that plan. The challenges to our economy and our people are serious, if only those opposite took them seriously as well.
I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to reports that the construction watchdog investigated Mr Luke Gibson, who allegedly told a female work safety officer to go call the police, "Off you go, you effing dog," followed by the C word. By dissolving the construction watchdog, why is the Prime Minister prioritising what the CFMEU wants over what women on work sites need?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. And at a time when we had an inflation figure yesterday of 6.1%, we have serious economic challenges before us. We've had an economic statement given by the Treasurer before this parliament today. We're back here again. Let me repeat. People, whether they're employees or employers, should behave appropriately on every work site, and every worker should behave properly. I note yesterday.
Order. The Prime Minister will just resume for a moment. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and I'll ask her to state the point of order.
entirely on relevance. The issue is not whether the behaviour is unacceptable. Of course it is. We all know that. The issue is why the priority is getting rid of the construction watchdog. Tough cop on the beat to address that behaviour.
The Prime Minister is referring to the behaviour in his answer. I'm listening carefully. I call the Prime Minister.
It's wrong in any workplace. And I've heard people sworn at in this place too. I've heard people behave badly in this workplace too. And it shouldn't happen. People should behave well in every workplace. But I'm asked about the issue of women in workplaces, and I tell you what the government is doing. We're adopting all 55 recommendations of the Jenkins report. All 55, including the obligation on employers, including those in the construction industry, to provide safe workplaces for women. That is what we are doing, and by providing those provisions that we will put into law, employers will have an obligation to provide safe workplaces for women, and that will affect the behaviour of everyone in those workplaces. That is what we are doing. The other thing we are doing is making gender pay equity an objective of the Fair Work Act, something that those opposite would never have done, and we'll wait to see whether they support it or not. And today, of all days, I would have thought if you were going to ask a question about domestic violence, which is what the first question was about today, or about the position of women and workplaces, you might have asked a question or indeed endorsed the legislation that was introduced just this morning for 10 days paid domestic and family violence leave. 10 days, 10 days paid domestic and family violence leave. It took the election of a Labor government to do that. We think
of Opposition Business.
We think that all workplaces should be safe workplaces. We're legislating to do just
Deputy
that.
Leader of the Opposition.
And the approach of those opposite says more about them than anything else.
I give the call to the member for Swan.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. A key part of the economic plan that Labor took to the election was for a future made in Australia. What work is the government doing to bring about that future?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Swan for her question. I congratulate her on her magnificent first speech, as well as her election to this place. She brings experience as an engineer in the mining industry around Kalgoorlie and around Western Australia, brings that experience to this House, and she adds so much to the quality of the House of Representatives by her election. The pandemic showed that Australia is at the end of a global supply chain, and that's a very precarious place to be. We know that future challenges could arise, be it future pandemics, issues of cybersecurity, international security, and we know that one of the lessons is we need to be more resilient as an economy. For a decade, what we've seen is manufacturing leave this country. Most significant, of course, was the car industry, which was dared to leave by those opposite. And that had real consequences throughout the supply chain. That had real consequences not just for the direct jobs affected, but for the innovation and industry that goes with car industries, which is why other countries around the world back their car industry. We've also seen a refusal to invest in new industries like renewables. We've seen opportunities lost. We've seen opportunities lost in that area.
Order. The Manager of Opposition Business.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, the question was about what work is the government doing to bring about that future. It wasn't an open-ended invitation to criticise the record or make incorrect allegations about the record of the previous government.
There is no point of order. The question the Prime Minister is answering is directly relevant to what he is saying. I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. What we need is a government that backs Australian workers, that backs Australian industries and backs Australian innovation and creativity. And we have just that. Through our National Reconstruction Fund, we will have a $15 billion fund to support existing industries to transform, but also to support new industries to be created. We have everything in this country that goes into a battery, for example, nickel, we have copper, we have lithium, and yet most of it is manufactured overseas. We need to value add here. Our resources sector will continue to be important in terms of exporting, but where we can, we should be value adding, creating the jobs, creating advanced manufacturing right here in this country. And one way that we can do that is by having cheaper, cleaner energy, which will drive down the cost of manufacturing in this country. We can advance food processing and value add to agriculture. We can add in terms of defence industry as well. We're a world leader in science. We've been responsible for so much of the innovation throughout the world, but we haven't commercialised those opportunities. We have a commitment for 1.2 million tech jobs by 2030. We'll also be a government that buys Australian, that uses our purchasing power to support small businesses in this country. We need a future made in Australia. We need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet, and that is one of the lessons that we have from the pandemic. We've learned it, we've developed a plan, and we'll set about implementing that plan over this term of government.
I give the call to the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. I thank the Minister for today reaffirming the government's commitment to deliver the promised 450 gigalitres of water to South Australia by 2024, as under the plan. Today's commitment is a relief for thousands of people across Mayo. Would the Minister please detail how the 450 gigalitres will be delivered to South Australia by 2024?
I give the call to the Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Mayo for her question. It's a very important question, and this government shares her concern to ensure that the 450 gigalitres of additional environmental water that was promised to South Australia in order for South Australia to sign on to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is in fact delivered. I support that objective. I know the Prime Minister supports that objective. I know the members for Spence and Boothby and Macon and Adelaide and the Minister for Health and the Minister for Social Services support that objective. I know the South Australian government is very committed, and I spoke again this week to their Deputy Premier and Minister for Water about how we deliver on this plan. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan is a good plan. Labor made it, Labor delivered on it. It's those opposite for almost a decade who have sabotaged the delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And I'd be interested to know whether the members for Gray and Barker and Sturt also support the delivery of the 450 gigalitres of environmental water for the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. I'll tell you something that makes this a little bit challenging, member for Mayo. What makes it challenging is that in almost a decade, those opposite have delivered 2 out of 450 gigalitres of water.
I'll just ask the Minister for Environment and Water to resume her seat. Order. I'll call the member for Petrie.
Relevance. The Environment Minister is not being relevant to the question. The question said nothing about alternative policies and what happened in the past.
Resume your seat. Order. The Minister is being entirely relevant. I'll give the call to the Minister for Environment.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'll tell you how we are delivering on it. In fact, in the 2 months that I've been the Environment Minister, I have already contracted almost 2 gigalitres of water towards this 450 gigalitre target. Order. I have done as much. I have contracted as much in 2 months as those opposite have delivered in almost a decade. I'll be meeting.
The member for Barker.
So I will be meeting. I will be meeting with state environment and water ministers in coming months.
Interjecting.
I'll be meeting with the state and ACT water ministers in coming months to make sure that we can deliver on this 450 gigalitre target. I'll be making sure that every state, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, the ACT and South Australia, do what they have promised to do, which is return this flow to the system. We'll increase First Nations water ownership and will take climate change into account in future modelling and planning for the system. We'll make sure that we release the Water for the Environment Special Account report. Guess what? Another report they had before the election and didn't release.
Order.
So I can reassure the member for Mayo we are committed to meeting this target. We'll work with you to do that.
I give the call to the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What do Treasury's revised forecasts for the economy mean for the budget, and what are the Albanese Labor government's budget priorities?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Speaker, and to the member for Lalor for her question about the implications of the combination of circumstances we confront in the economy and what that means for the Commonwealth budget. It's true that in recent times the good prices that we've been getting for our commodities on global markets have helped prop up the budget, as have the fact, in the last year at least, that the former government found it very difficult, indeed impossible, to get some of their commitments away. And so that means in the near term there have been some improvements in the budget. But the structural issues that those opposite presided over and made worse over almost a decade in government do constrain the new government's choices as we deal with this combination of challenges. And so what we've said really for some time now is that there is an onus on us to provide genuine value for money, to invest in the future of our economy, to invest in responsible cost of living relief, at the same time as we trim back the legacy of rorts and waste which defined budget policy under those opposite for the best part of a decade. And I listened to the Shadow Treasurer earlier on responding to the statement that I gave to the Parliament. And in that 14 minutes of absolute dribble from the Shadow Treasurer, what I noticed was the fake indignation that we hear from those opposite would be far more convincing if they hadn't been in government for the best part of a decade and created all of the challenges that the new government is now left to deal with. Whether it's in water, as the member for Sydney said, or really right across the board, all of these ministers are dealing with a legacy for almost a decade now.
The Treasurer will just cool his jets for a moment. I'll call the Manager of Opposition Business. Manager of Opposition Business, before I call you, just wait till I call you before you start talking, okay? Plenty of time, but I'll give you the call now.
It goes to relevance, Mr Speaker. Again, the question asked about what are the government's economic priorities. We're a minute and a half in, and he spent most of his time criticising the record of the previous government.
Seat. The question was specifically about the revised economic forecasts and what the impacts means for the budget. The Treasurer is in order, and I give him the call.
Look, it may be embarrassing for those opposite, Mr Speaker, to hear, but they want to talk about their record in government, the record that we've inherited, the budget that we've inherited. The truth is that the choices that we make as a new government are constrained by the fact that we've inherited $1 trillion of debt with almost nothing to show for it. And the reason for that is because the Shadow Treasurer and all of these colleagues arraigned before us on the Shadow front bench, the dregs of the former Liberal government, have left us with these challenges. Whether it's a budget which is chock full of rorts and waste, which the member for Hume knows more about than probably anybody in this parliament, whether it's the fact that we don't have enough to show for this $1 trillion in debt and that every dollar that they borrowed now costs more to service in the budget. The fastest growing area of spending in the budget is us paying the interest on the debt that they accumulated over almost a decade. So the best thing they could do, Mr Speaker, is instead of railing with all this fake indignation about the circumstances that they gave to us, is to do the right thing and come together as the rest of Australia does as we try and fix the mess that we've inherited.
I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition, who will be heard in silence.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Since the construction watchdog was last abolished by the Prime Minister, the militant CFMEU has handed well over $10 million to the Prime Minister's party. The watchdog had a 91% success rate in court, prosecuted over 2,500 contraventions, secured over $16 million in penalties and recovered over $5 million in wages for over 8,000 workers. We understand there are 10 million reasons why your government has taken the side of the corrupt and criminal CFMEU
Order. I just
over
ask you to
Australians.
resume your seat. Leader of the Opposition, for one moment, sorry to interrupt. I was crystal clear saying that I wanted silence while the Leader was being heard. The member for Moreton has been continuing interjecting. He will leave the chamber under 94A. He may be my neighbour, but he's having a holiday. I give the call to the manager, the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The issue was raised yesterday about imputations of motive. The question and the section that this question's at right now is a direct imputation of motive. It can't be seen in any other way, and I'd ask for the question to either be rephrased or ruled out of order.
I'll hear from the manager of opposition
that's
business.
completely incorrect, Mr Speaker. It goes to the factual circumstance, not a question of motive. It's the factual circumstances around the donations that have been made.
Order. I do not need assistance from anyone on the left, on my left. Order. Order. Depends on how you look at it. I'll ask the Leader of the Opposition to rephrase that part of the question, and I'll ask him to start the question again and to start the clock again.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Prime Minister, since the construction watchdog was abolished by the Prime Minister, the militant CFMEU has handed over well over $10 million to the Prime Minister's party. The watchdog has had a 91% success rate in court, prosecuted over 2,500 contraventions, secured over $16 million in penalties and recovered over $5 million in wages for over 8,000 workers. Prime Minister, we understand that the $10 million paid to the Labor Party by the CFMEU has resulted in a policy change. What else do they get for their $10 million?
The Leader's time has expired. There was a question at the very end. I'll call the Prime Minister. There was a question right at the very end.
I thank the member for his question and for his showing the workers of Australia that this remains an anti-union party that is obsessed by attacking the rights of trade unions.
The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition has asked his question. The Prime Minister deserves to be heard in silence. I call the Prime Minister.
The rights of trade unions to exist. And I say this to the honourable member opposite, that if unions did not exist in the construction industry—
I'll ask the Prime Minister just to resume. I'll call the Leader of the Opposition, and it better be a point of order.
Well, it is a point of order, of course, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance. The $10 million figure is never mentioned by the Prime Minister, and yet that is what the
there's
CFMEU
no point of order.
gave
Resume
to
your
the
seat. The Prime Minister has been is entitled to a preamble. He is in order. I'm listening carefully to his answer. It was a highly political and partisan question, and I'm asking the Prime Minister to give him the call to respond.
I'm quite happy to engage in these questions about whether unions should exist in the construction industry, about whether it is everything to do with it. The truth is, that those opposite. The truth is that those opposite do not believe that there should be unions in the construction industry. And if there weren't unions in the construction industry, the number of deaths on work sites would increase. The number of injuries on work sites would increase. And I've been in this place for 26 years, and not once have I heard any coalition member speak about safety on construction sites. Not once. Not once. Not once have I seen a criticism of employers who when left unfettered, without the protection of unions, often result in activities that leads to tragedies in those workplaces. Not once.
The Leader of the Opposition,
all workers
Barker,
should be subject
the
to the same laws and regulations as others. That is the simple principle that we on this side hold. The ABCC has not done anything to improve workplace safety. It doesn't do anything to guard against wage theft, that we will make a crime, by the way, that those opposite had the numbers for to create wage theft a crime, and the member's question went to this, went to the issue of the retention of wages and paying them back. Well, those opposite actually had legislation before this House that was passed, and when it got to the Senate, they withdrew the provisions about wage theft being made a crime. The truth is that good unions and employers work together to share a common interest, which is why we'll be bringing them together at the Jobs and Skills Summit.
I give the call to the honourable member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to assist Australia's small businesses to grow and to create more jobs, given the challenges facing the Australian economy?
I give the call to the Minister for Small Business, Housing and Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I take the opportunity to congratulate you on your new role. And I also want to thank the member for Wills, who knows that small businesses are a critical part of his local community and have a large impact on the economy in his local community.
The member for Moncrief.
Small businesses, of course, are the engine room of the nation's economy. They're at the centre of local communities and they employ millions of Australians. And we all know what a difficult few years small business have had in this country with the global pandemic. Of course, there have been floods and there have been bushfires.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
And we know that it's had a significant impact on them, but they have been incredibly resilient. Despite the resilience, though, small businesses are facing challenges. And we heard from the Treasurer earlier today about what some of those challenges are. Small businesses know that we inherited $1 trillion of debt. They know that the rising cost of inflation is increasing the cost of their supplies. They know that interest rates are increasing. They know that electricity prices are increasing, even though those on the other side didn't have the guts to tell small business prior to the election, did they? And of course there's significant workforce shortages. And we also know that those over there didn't do anything about that for 9 years other than cut skills and training. And we on this side of the House, of course, understand how important small business is to the economy, which is why we've moved so quickly to actually support small businesses. We want to invest taxpayer money where it really matters. We introduced yesterday, of course, Jobs and Skills Australia legislation because we want to reinvest in skills in Australia. We want to make sure that small businesses have the workers with the skills they need to be able to expand their local businesses. We want to rebuild TAFE. And of course, with our cheaper childcare, we want to make it easier for parents to do additional hours in those small businesses. It's also, Mr Speaker, why we've recently changed the Commonwealth procurement rules. We want to ensure that small businesses have a better pathway to engage and do business with government. Indeed, we're making it a requirement that 20% of Commonwealth procurement must come from small businesses. $70 billion a year in Commonwealth contracts, 20% going to small businesses. This will provide certainty to small businesses. It will mean that they can invest in their communities, in their businesses, and that they can grow and they can create more jobs in local businesses. And of course, we have already announced that we're going to be working hard, the Assistant Minister for Competition, to make sure that we legislate unfair contract terms for small businesses. We want to make sure that they can negotiate with larger businesses. The former government over there said that they would do it, but of course 9 long years they were there and they didn't get round to it. But this side of the House is going to act and act quickly to support small businesses because we've got their back. We want to support them so they can grow in local communities right across the country and create jobs.
I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given foot and mouth disease will cost the Australian economy $80 billion and hit everyday family budgets for milk and meat, does the Prime Minister agree with Labor Agriculture Minister Alana McTiernan's statement that FMD won't be catastrophic and that milk and meat will actually be cheaper?
I give the call to the Prime Minister. Order. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence. The Leader of the Nationals was heard in silence. I'd ask the same respect to be shown to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the National Party for his question. I congratulate him on his election to high office. It must be difficult to follow the member for New England in your position, but I wish you well. I wish you well. I was aware of FMD, and I'm accountable to what happens in this place, of course. And I was made aware by a tweet on the 9th of May 2022. A tweet, 9th of May on 2022. And that tweet said that this morning Chief Veterinary Officer Mark Shipp briefed me about foot and mouth disease and its presence in Indonesia. There it was, May 9, 2022. You would have expected the person who got that information to have acted and to not be in a position to then subsequently to what happens down the track.
The Leader of the Nationals and the Minister for Infrastructure.
People didn't act earlier. I heard that yesterday. I heard him say people didn't act earlier. But the tweet was in fact from David Littleproud, MP. David Littleproud, MP.
He sounds familiar.
So, on the 9th of May, he was alert to the issue.
I'll just ask the Prime Minister. I'll call order. 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 Members on my right. I'll call the member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. The question went relevance. The point of order is relevance. This question went quite specifically to Alana McTiernan very irresponsible statements and outrageous statements to every farmer in this country, and the Prime Minister needs to address the comments that she made.
Resume your seat. Thank you for. You may resume your seat. The question was about foot and mouth disease and the impact on the economy. I'm calling the Prime Minister. Order. The Leader of the Nationals. Give the call to the Prime Minister. I'm listening to his answer carefully.
I am indeed taking the issue seriously, and the government's taking the issue seriously. What we won't take seriously is someone who says, "Oh, why didn't you act earlier?" when he was the minister who rang the bell and said this is happening on the 9th of May, and then said, "Oh, why didn't you act why didn't you act earlier?" Seriously, seriously. They talk about foot and mouth disease.
The member for Page.
People coming in and whether shoes have been checked off enough. This is the same mob that let the Ruby Princess come in. A bit more noticeable than a pair of shoes was docked at Sydney Harbour. Everyone got off and brought COVID in. That was on your watch after you said that you'd stop the Ruby Princess coming in. After you said we would stop cruise ships entering Australia, they allowed the Ruby Princess to dock. The truth is we are acting with the strongest biosecurity response in Australia's history, and that's why our response is backed by the NFF, backed by the cattle industry. You don't have a single peak agriculture organisation backing your rhetoric.
The Leader of the Nationals.
Not one. What? Unlike the NFF. Unlike the NFF. Let it be recalled that he regards himself as a greater representative of the National Farmers Federation.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Before I call the member for Corangamite, order. There is far too much noise. The member for Wannon. The member for Wannon. There is far too much noise in the chamber. I've already ejected one member. I will have no hesitation now in issuing a general warning and advising if this behaviour continues, members will be asked to leave the chamber. Give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What is the Albanese government doing to get wages moving again after a decade of low wage growth?
I give the call to the Leader of the House and Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Corangamite for the question, and particularly today. Members might not know that when the member for Corangamite was the mayor of Surf Coast Shire, they became the first employer in the world to establish family and domestic violence leave. And so it's a real pleasure to receive that question, particularly today. The question asks about getting wages moving again, and it matters because we've had a decade of wages being deliberately kept low, and you look at the inflation figures that are coming out now and imagine how much worse it would have been for people right now had the government not already acted to get the minimum wage moving. Now, there are three parts of what the government will be doing to get wages moving. The first is the formal processes under the Fair Work Act, the second are closing loopholes, and the third will be to reinvigorate enterprise bargaining. On the first of those formal processes was to participate in the annual wage review. We remember hearing that the sky would fall in if we advocated for the improvement, but there are now workers all around Australia who are being paid more than they would have been paid because they now have a government fighting for their wages to get moving. But the formal processes don't stop there. It won't be too long before the government's making a submission on the review of aged care workers' wages, where we'll be supporting a wage increase there. And the third area where formal processes need to be looked at is we do need to legislate to be able to make sure the formal processes can deliver pay equity, and our pay equity reforms will be coming as well. The second area, though, is the loopholes. There's been a whole lot of loopholes that have appeared in the Act that have never been closed. So, we get a loophole in the Tax Act, we come in here, there's a TLAB bill at the moment, and we close them really quickly, but for a decade, when there's been a loophole that causes wages to go down, it was just left there. So we'll be acting on the gig economy. We'll be acting on the way labour hire is being used with the same job, same pay principle. And we'll also, in that area, I'm looking very closely at the unilateral termination of agreements, where people, when they're voting on a new agreement, aren't simply voting on whether or not they get a pay increase, but are potentially voting on whether their dollar rate of pay immediately could go backwards if there's a unilateral cancellation of agreements. But finally, we all know the best period of getting wages moving with productivity improvements is when bargaining is at its best. The Prime Minister has put enterprise bargaining squarely on the table for the Job Summit, and we'll be looking closely there for where consensus is available and also where good ideas are put forward. We need to get wages moving again, and after a decade of them being stagnant, it's time for that to happen.
Give the call to the Shadow Treasurer, the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Mr Speaker, today the Treasurer told us he painted a picture. How much will painting that picture reduce the prices of the essential goods and services Australians are buying every day?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Look, I want to begin this answer with a little bit of advice for the member for Hume. And that is to the member for Hume, when these geniuses write you a question which has something to do with energy prices, you should say no thanks. Thanks, but no thanks. Because, mate, I would be happy if you asked me 11 questions a day about the energy market, because every single member of this House knows, and the people of Australia know, that you as the Energy Minister, the member for Hume as the Energy Minister, is more responsible than anyone for the last decade of energy policy failures which have driven up the costs of energy. And if the member wants to ask me about inflation in this economy, he could at least fess up to the fact that he knew before the election that electricity prices were about to go up by around 20%, and he sat on that information. He didn't tell the Australian people about that. This is the political and economic equivalent of the arsonist whinging about the firefighters taking too long. Those opposite asking us about inflation, when their record is of almost a decade now of making all of the problems in our economy worse rather than better. It takes a lot of nerve to ask a question about the cost of living. The member for Hume He wants to talk about his record earlier on today. The member for Hume wrecked the energy market, he rorted the budget, and now he wants to get his hands on the Australian economy.
I'll call the manager of the... Has the Treasurer concluded his answer? Resume your seat. Manager of Opposition Business. Resume your seat. The Treasurer has answered the question. And I give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What message will the government take to the Garma Festival, given the importance of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and of closing the gap?
I call the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Robertson for his question. I congratulate him on his election and in joining the growing number of First Nations people who are represented in this House and in the Senate across the political spectrum. The Garma Festival is Australia's most significant gathering of First Nations people to celebrate culture, but also to discuss their future. It's a real opportunity, and I'll be travelling there with the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, with the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs as well tomorrow, as well as with Senator Dodson, who has been given special responsibility as the envoy for reconciliation and the Uluru implementation. The Uluru Statement is a gracious, generous hand being extended to non-Indigenous Australians, and I believe we should seize the opportunity and grasp it to advance us as a nation. It will be one of those moments, just like the apology was, where after it happened everyone will wonder why we didn't do it beforehand, and everyone will be lifted up, the entire nation, by recognising in our Constitution, in our national birth certificate, that Australia didn't begin in 1788, nor did we end. But we should be a great source of pride that we have the oldest continuous civilisation on the planet sharing this island continent of ours. It is a great privilege, and we should honour it. But we need also to recognise that it's not a matter of doing that or closing the gap, not a matter of some symbolism as some people would see it. What it's a matter of is empowerment. Giving people respect is a first step to overcoming some of the challenges which are there, and we know that they're there. There's a life expectancy gap of some 20 years. We have some of the worst incarceration rates in the world, and that's why when you look at the programs that have been most successful, when a government listens to people, justice reinvestment, Indigenous ranges, the National Partnership Agreement process driven by the coalition of Peaks and Pat Turner, they are the successful programs. Our policies include 500 additional Aboriginal healthcare workers, investing in life-saving kidney dialysis treatment, Housing Australia Future Fund to repair remote housing, locally tailored justice reinvestment. We'll do all of that, but at the same time we want to work across the parliament and indeed across the country to lift this nation up by recognising our First Nations people in our Constitution, giving them a voice to Parliament, which is nothing more and nothing less than good manners, consulting people on matters that affect them. And that's why I look forward to advancing the discussions on the weekend, and I'm pleased that across the Parliament the Shadow Minister and the Minister will be there travelling with me tomorrow.
I give the call to the member for Warringah.
Thank you. To the Minister for the Environment and Water, congratulations, and thank you for visiting me, visiting with me the Sydney Harbour Federation sites in Warringah. Iconic places from the North Head Sanctuary to Mossman's Headland Park, ancestral Indigenous sites, and the very military map rooms and tunnels where the defence of Sydney was planned in World War II. But these sites need to be valued, and they're falling into disrepair. Will you invest in the restoration and conservation of these sites for future generations?
I give the call to the Minister for Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Warringah for her question, and I want to thank her for going with me and also with the member for North Sydney to see some of these beautiful special places on Sydney Harbour. We are honoured, and as is the Prime Minister, as is the member for Wentworth, honoured, I think, to represent these areas surrounding our beautiful Sydney Harbour here in the National Parliament. Sydney Harbour has deep history, 65,000 years of history, stories told so well by Aboriginal tour groups like Tribal Warrior that sail around the harbour showing tourists the history of the place. As the member for Warringah said, we've got military history, convict history, maritime and industrial history, and of course the beautiful natural environment, the incredible diversity, biodiversity under the waters of Sydney Harbour, protected and restored so well by the Sydney Institute of Marine Science. I am excited, as the member for Warringah is, and as I know the member for North Sydney is, about two really exciting master plans that are being developed at the moment by the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust, managing the land of Cockatoo Island and the North Head Sanctuary. The member for Warringah is quite right. These areas have been run down in recent years and neglected by those opposite. And I know that the Prime Minister has a special interest in this because, of course, Cockatoo Island is part of his area, and he was profoundly influenced by his mentor and my friend Tom Uren. Tom Uren was a man who took up the lesson of Niels Nielsen, a very early lands minister in the New South Wales government, who thought that every Australian, every Sydney-sider should have access to the properties around our harbour, to the beaches and the foreshore and the built environment and the natural environment. That is the principle that we will always use when we are considering how we best protect, restore and maintain these precious sites.
I give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. How is the Australian government delivering the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and in particular progressing an Indigenous voice to Parliament in the Constitution?
I give the call to the Minister.
I thank the member for Lingiari for her question and congratulate her on her very powerful speech last night. And I want people in this chamber to note the history is being made right now with the member for Lingiari asking me this question. Mr Speaker, history is calling us all. The Australian government is committed, as the Prime Minister just said, to implementing the Uluru Statement in full. We will hold a referendum to enshrine a First Nations voice in the Constitution this term of Parliament. The oldest continuous cultures in the world, something that is a gift to all of us. Despite inhabiting this land for more than 60,000 years, we have no place in the founding legal document. It is a glaring omission. This is not a radical proposal. It is fair and it is practical. It is about growing our nation up together. It's about unity. It's about hope. It's about consulting, as the Prime Minister has just said, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people about laws and policies that affect us. And it is about delivering practical outcomes. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create lasting change. It is one shot in the locker. Every Australian will have the chance to answer the Uluru Statement's patience call, and I invite them to do so. Uluru was 5 years ago. Since then, there's been consideration by constitutional experts, First Nation leaders and parliamentary committees. I believe Australians are ready to take the next step. I want to acknowledge the Shadow Minister and his really good will and involvement in the discussions that we have had. I am encouraged by the in-principle support of all state and territory leaders, including Premier Perrottet from New South Wales and Premier Rockcliffe from Tasmania. I invite all the members of this place to join us on this journey. This is an issue that does not belong to either side of politics. It is about building a better future. Mr. Speaker, history is calling us. Australians believe in decency. And I say to those on the other side, get onto the station. We want you to be on the train with us.
I give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my question goes to the Prime Minister. You promised a $275 decrease in household power bills. Will you guarantee to the House that Australian families will see that $275 cut?
Very good question. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, which goes to the commitment that Labor has through our Powering Australia plan, and it is indeed a comprehensive plan that was fully modelled by Reputex, who are Australia's leading energy economists. And what Reputex did was have a look at the full suite of policies that we have, including fixing transmission in this country, bringing it into the 21st century through our plan to rewire the nation. That was in my first budget reply, and that will be the most significant element in terms of the changes that will occur. But it wasn't just, of course, something that we came up with. It's based upon the Integrated Systems Plan of the Australian Energy Market Operator. It's been out there for such a long period of time that you need to, with the rise in renewable energy, make sure that you can connect up to the grid so that Australians can benefit from it. But what we've got
Shadow Treasurer
from those opposite when it comes to energy prices, of course, is it's about energy prices.
The Prime Minister, order. The Prime Minister will take a breather. I'll just Manager of Opposition Business. Remember, I told you, wait till you get the call and then you can start speaking. Order. The member for McEwen. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Point of order is relevance. Very simple question. Will you guarantee to the House that Australian families will see the $275 cut?
Resume your seat. The member for Page, I don't need any assistance in the cheap seats next to me. The Prime Minister was asked a question about his commitment regarding a $275 decrease in household power. He was referring to the policy announcement. I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I was referring to our Powering Australia plan. I can understand how those opposite are confused by this, because we actually had a plan. Those opposite had a pamphlet. Those opposite had a pamphlet.
Treasurer.
But they also had
the Shadow Treasurer.
It was their 20-second pamphlet that they had. We have a comprehensive plan which is backed by the Business Council of Australia, which is backed by the Australian Industry Group, which is backed by the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, backed by the Clean Energy Council, backed by the Australian Conservation Foundation, backed by Greenpeace, backed by the Australian Council of Trade Unions. And what every single one of those organisations is saying is that business needs the investment certainty that they haven't had for a decade.
Order. The Prime Minister will just resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition, we've had one question, one standing order moved about relevance. What is your point of order?
Well, it is a point of order, Mr. Speaker. This is the most tortured answer. The answer really is no.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. the Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. I want to be clear on this point. There is one point of order made on relevance. I will not tolerate the standing orders being abused, and I call the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's only day 2 of question time, and it's the second best day they'll have. It's the second best day they'll have because it doesn't get better. The truth is that those opposite sat on the information knowing that energy prices would go up in July. Not only did they sit on it, they refused to tell the Australian people. They knew that was baked in to the wholesale prices, and they refused to tell them.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. And I give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. After a decade of cuts and neglect, what are the Albanese Labor government's plans to strengthen and protect Medicare?
I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a great honour to get that question from my friend, the member for Werriwa, because the Labor Party has no prouder legacy than our contribution to universal health coverage in this country, particularly through the twin pillars of the PBS and Medicare. Great Labor initiatives opposed vigorously by the Liberal Party at the time, including in Medicare's case literally for decades. Mr. Speaker, who can forget the father of the modern Liberal Party, John Howard, with a straight face describing Medicare as one of the great failures of the Hawke government. Mr. Speaker, that's why it's been the duty of every incoming health minister of the Labor Party, Doug Everingham, Neil Blewett, Nicola Roxon, to confront and clean up the mess left by their Liberal Party predecessors, and it's exactly the same this time, Mr. Speaker. After 9 long years of neglect and cuts to Medicare, it has never been harder, never been more expensive to see a doctor than it is right now, because after the now Leader of the Opposition failed to get his GP tax through the parliament, a tax that would have ended bulk billing forever and for everyone, he imposed a freeze on the MBS rebate for 6 long years, a freeze that has baked in an ongoing cut to Medicare of more than $500 million each and every year. Mr. Speaker, no wonder gap fees skyrocketed under this government. No wonder the average gap fee to see a GP
the Minister will just resume his seat. The member for order, the member for Petrie, I will give the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of order on relevance. It's a minute 30, and there was nothing asked about alternative policies. He spent a minute 30 talking about us.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The member for Petrie, you're continually raising wrong points of order. The minister was asked, after a decade of neglect, what are the government's plans for health and aged care? That means he's referring to what's happened over the last 10 years. May I give the call to the Minister for Health?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and no wonder the average gap fee to see a GP now, for the first time in Medicare's history, is more than the Medicare rebate itself, and no wonder junior doctors are walking away from general practice in droves. Mr. Speaker, just as every new Labor government has had to do, we will clean up this mess, because there is no higher priority for Labor than a strong Medicare system. That's why we're already working with state governments to deliver our 50 urgent care clinics, which will make it easier to see a doctor and take pressure off our hospitals. Tomorrow I'll chair the first meeting of the Strengthening Medicare Task Force to advise the government on our $750 million commitment to deliver on the primary care sector's plan for better primary care, delivered to patients when and where they need it. And, Mr. Speaker, we'll slash the price of medicines for millions of general patients. We're expanding the Aboriginal health workforce, as well as services for dialysis and rheumatic heart disease. We'll introduce world's best screening programs for our precious newborn babies, and we'll fund upgrades to the thousands of general practices that work so hard to keep us safe over the last 2.5 years. Mr. Speaker, after 9 long years of neglect and cuts, There is much to do to strengthen and protect our Medicare system. And finally, Australia has a government with a plan to do it.
Order. Order. I'll give the call to the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport. How many additional nurses are needed to fulfil the government's commitment to have 24/7 nursing in aged care by 2023?
Great question.
I give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Hughes for her question, and I congratulate her on her first speech in the House yesterday, and I welcome her to this place. With respect to the question of 24/7 nurses, I was so pleased to get to be the minister to introduce that in the House yesterday morning. There were many people from this side of the House yesterday morning here witnessing the very first bill through the House in this 47th parliament to be one to get to the work of reforming aged care, something that was neglected for 9 very long years under the previous government. And like the Minister for Environment, I noted from an earlier answer today, in just 9 weeks, in the first 100 days, we are going to deliver 17 and 2, 19 recommendations of the Royal Commission in the first 100 days of this government, compared to only 9 in 17 months of the previous government. 9 in 17 months compared to 19 in the first 100 days. One of those goes to 24/7 nurses, if that's the member for Page. Are you coming for me on that?
The minister will resume her seat. I call the member. Order. 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 I remind members on the left, one of your members are taking a point of order. I will ask for his call. I'll give him the call when there is silence. The member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. Relevance. I asked the minister maybe Google it. It's a number. It's a number. The answer to that question is a number.
Resume your seat. The minister. Order. Order. The minister is being relevant. She's been on her feet for 1 minute. The question was specifically regarding the government's policies around additional nurses, regarding the commitment in aged care. I'll call the minister.
Thank the Speaker. So we estimate that about 80% of the facilities across Australia already fulfil or nearly fulfil that requirement, 24/7 nurses. So we are focused 110% on the 20% of facilities that are not yet fulfilling the 24/7 nursing requirement. We need to lift up a standard of care across the country that was neglected for 9 years under the previous government. And I note this newfound interest in 24/7 nurses that they could not find within themselves to support in the Senate in the previous government. In the 46th Parliament, this bill that we put through the House yesterday morning would have gone through, but for their inability to support 24/7 nurses. So now you look to me to ask how I'm going to deliver something that you could not do yourselves, despite the fact that in the Senate they had the ability in Budget Week, Mr Speaker, in Budget Week, in the dying days of the Morrison government, one of the very last things they could have done was legislate 24/7 nurses for older Australians across the country, but you didn't. You didn't. So now we will. In the first 100 days, we have commenced that legislative process. We are working with providers to make sure that everybody will have those nurses, so that come 1 July next year, every single older Australian knows that they will have access to a nurse when they need it in their facility across the country. We will do that in tandem with our friends in the industrial movement who are helping us move forward, with our friends in the Community and Providers Association who are working with us to make sure that people in regional and rural areas, people in remote areas can access nurses, have the exemptions and support that they need to do that. And I'm pleased and proud that this side of the House understands the importance of that. I am heartened by the question. It suggests there might have been a turnaround in your approach, but I note that we would not be in this position of being forced to address this workforce shortages if you'd done anything in the past 9 years to take aged care reform seriously.
The minister's time has expired. The Manager of Opposition. Order. Order. Just ask the member for Macquarie to resume her seat. Well, I didn't hear what the Manager of Opposition Business said. For the third time today, If I don't call you, I can't hear what you say, so there is no point talking until I call you. I give the call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for the Environment and Water. What actions is the government taking to address the decade of neglect of our environment, as highlighted in the State of the Environment report?
I give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Macquarie for that question. I was fortunate enough to visit her electorate just last week, where I met with New South Wales Parks volunteers, the Blue Mountains Conservation Society and other members of her constituency who are passionately committed to better protection for the environment of the Blue Mountains and surrounds. Last week I released the State of the Environment report. This is a report that is to be tabled every 5 years, keeping Australians up to date with the state of the environment. Now, the previous government received this report in December last year. The minister at the time had it sitting on her desk in December last year. But she didn't release it in December. She didn't release it in January. She didn't release it in February, in March, nor in April, nor in May. And I'll tell you the reason she didn't release it when she had it for 6 months is because this report tells a story of an environment in bad shape and getting worse, in catastrophic ways, in an accelerating decline. It tells the story that Australia has, for the first time, more introduced plant species than native plant species. Australia has lost more mammal species to extinction than any other continent. The habitat the size of Tasmania has been lost in the last couple of decades. Plastics are choking our oceans, up to 80,000 pieces of plastic in a square kilometre of ocean. The flow in the Murray-Darling River system in 2019, the lowest on record. The Murray-Darling River system under greater pressure than ever before. Is it any wonder then that those opposite didn't want Australians to know this? And what did they do to turn it around? I'll tell you what, they did nothing to turn it around. Instead, they axed climate laws. They failed to fix the broken environmental laws that don't serve business and don't serve the Australian environment. They set recycling targets with no hope of meeting the targets, no plan to meet them. They cut the highly protected areas of marine parks in half. They halved the highly protected areas of marine parks, and they cut funding to the Environment Department by 40%. We will change this. $1.2 billion to restore our Great Barrier Reef, $250 million to protect threatened species. Real action on climate change, one of the first acts of the new government. Growing the national estate, protecting 30% of our land and 30% of our waters by 2030 at least. Actually delivering on the $276 million promised by those opposite but never delivered to protect Kakadu National Park. These are the commitments that we make, that we will deliver after a decade of neglect by those opposite.
Order. The member's time has expired. I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport. I refer the Minister to her previous answer and I ask, what is the number of additional nurses needed to fulfil the government's commitment to have 24/7 nursing in aged care?
I give the call to the Minister for Ageing and Sport.
869.
Order. 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 The member for Moncrieff, the member for Barker. I give the call to the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Government Services. What progress is the Albanese government making towards establishing a Royal Commission into robo-debt?
I give the call to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and congratulations on your election. Just for the benefit of the House, when talking about the Robo-Debt Royal Commission, I might remind members that robo-debt's the colloquial term that's been used to describe the automated debt collection system, which was introduced by the previous government in July of 2015 until it was ceased in November of 2019. It was a system which was designed so the Commonwealth could say it was chasing payments that it was allegedly owed by social security recipients.
Business.
But in about April of 2021, at the door of the federal court, on the day that ministers and senior public servants might have had to have given evidence in the trial of the class action, the Commonwealth finally admitted that it had no legal basis to raise these debts, that in fact it unlawfully raised $1.7 billion of debts against 433,000 vulnerable Australians. It was described by the court as a shameful chapter in Commonwealth public administration. It was described by the court that it should have been obvious to senior public servants and responsible ministers at different points who designed it, who oversaw it, who boasted about it in the media, that it was an illegal scheme. Advocates, citizens, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, MPs, the media all campaigned on this. Great harm was caused by the robo-debt scheme. Financial hardship, distress, anxiety and far worse. Yes, the money's now been repaid, courtesy of the class action. Yes, the scheme has stopped, courtesy of the people of Australia. Yes, the government's gone, courtesy of the voters. But Labor has promised to introduce a Royal Commission because there is much that we do not know. I work with my colleagues, the Attorney-General and the Minister for Social Services. The terms of reference will likely go to who was responsible for the design, development and establishment of the scheme. What questions were ever asked about its legality? What risks were identified? Why were the volume of complaints and the administrative appeal decisions ignored for 4.5 years? What were the full costs of this scheme? This Royal Commission will start, most likely, in the last quarter of this year. Hopefully it will be concluded in the first 6 months of next year. We're finalising the personnel, but let us be very clear to the people of Australia. If we don't learn from the mistakes which the previous government has never owned up to, then we can make it again. It's the very least that we owe to nearly 500,000 of our fellow Australians who are illegally attacked by their own government.
I give the call to the member for Indi.
Speaker, and congratulations on your appointment. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture. Indi is sheep and cattle country. If foot and mouth disease hits Australia, the cost to our community will be devastating, and the people of Indi are worried. Having grown up on a dairy farm and as someone who still runs beef cattle, I feel this fear too. What are the next steps to strengthen Australia's biosecurity response, and when would the government take those steps?
I give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Agricultural, Fisheries and Forestry.
Thanks very much, and can I thank the member for Indi for her question. I know, like all of us who represent regional communities in this place, that we are extremely concerned about the risk of foot and mouth disease entering this country. It is a concern that the Australian government is taking very seriously. It's why we have put the toughest biosecurity measures that the country has ever seen actually in place. I do thank the member for Indi who attended the backbench briefing that was provided by Senator Watt, the Minister, yesterday, and for the Chief Vet and for her staff coming along as well. I think that's an important part of ensuring that we all do our part in making sure that messages are getting out, whether you're in a regional seat like my own or whether you're in another seat, you've got people travelling to Indonesia and Bali, that you are all getting consistent messages out. As you know, the Australian government has put in place these tough biosecurity measures, and they include measures in Indonesia, which I outlined to the House yesterday, and measures here in country. But of course, we are monitoring the situation closely every single hour, every single day. We continue to take advice from the biosecurity experts in relation to any further measures that are needed. We do know that we need to continue working very closely with our Indonesian counterparts. It is in our national interest that Indonesia gets on top of that. Our embassy in Jakarta is working and engaging with Indonesia at the highest levels, and of course we are continuing to offer both financial and technical assistance in that. But of course the very best way to ensure FMD does not come to Australia is to assist Indonesia to get that outbreak under control, and we're committed to doing everything we can to protect this important Australian industry.
I give the call to the member for McEwen.
Question to the Deputy Prime Minister. What is the Albanese government's plan to meet the national security challenges facing Australia in the region? Why is deeper engagement in the region important for Australia?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my good friend, the member for McEwen, for this question and congratulate him on his really wonderful re-election to this place. Australia is facing the most complex set of strategic circumstances that we have since the end of the Second World War. The global rules-based order, which Australia helped build from Bretton Woods onwards, and with the United States since then have helped try to protect, is under more pressure and strain now than at any point since the end of the Second World War. The appalling invasion by Russia of Ukraine, a large country seeking to impose itself on a smaller neighbour, not by reference to the rule of law but through might and power, is an example. But we see examples in the Indo-Pacific. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, freedom of navigation, so important to us as an island trading nation, is also under strain. As China seeks to shape the world around it in a way that we have not seen before, this raises really complex challenges for Australia, not least because China is our largest trading partner. And to be sure, we value a productive relationship with China, and we want to see that relationship in a better place. But while the Australian government has changed, our national interest has not, and the Albanese government is absolutely committed to standing up for Australia's national interest, particularly when that differs from the actions of other countries, including China. While the way forward is not obvious, what's really clear at this moment is that it is a time to be working with like-minded countries, with our friends, which is why it was so important that the Prime Minister attend the meeting of the Quad, even though this occurred immediately after the last election. And indeed, the Prime Minister's presence there was very profound. Since then, I have visited every member of the Quad, Japan, India and the United States. And what's really apparent is that in each of our bilateral relationships with these countries, there's never been a greater degree of strategic purpose. There has never been more closeness in our relationship, including defence cooperation. And so that, combined with repairing our relationships with the ASEAN, rebuilding our relationships with the Pacific Island countries, makes it clear that under this government, Australia is back at the table of the international community of nations. And this stands in stark contrast to the government that was led by those opposite over 9 years who did nothing other than shout at the world. Strategic policy, foreign policy, it is not a fundamentalist space. We will engage with sense and with intelligence, and precisely because of that, Australians will be safer.
Order. I call the Leader of the Opposition on indulgence on that question.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I wanted to join in support of the comments, the opening comments of the Minister for Defence. Not the flourish at the end, obviously, but this is an issue that is incredibly important for our country, for our region. It's important for us to have the strongest possible relationship with our allies, not just the United States and the United Kingdom, but with India, Japan and others in the region, and we will support whatever action the government takes to take the decisions to keep our country safe in a very uncertain world.
Call the Prime Minister on indulgence.
Thanks. No, Mr Speaker. Firstly, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
And I call the Prime Minister on indulgence.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Just briefly, the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony is tonight. And I'm sure, along with the Minister for Sport, and I'm sure along with all members of the House of Representatives, we wish all of our athletes, the men and women who will represent our great nation, all the best over the coming fortnight as they compete in Birmingham and as they do Australia proud.
On indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, likewise I join with the Prime Minister in offering support to our best, to our greatest, and we expect to scoop the pool. There's a lot of opportunity there for us, and wonderful athletes, and we thank their family, the support staff, all of those that have contributed to what I'm sure will be great success and make all Australians very proud.
I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise with a question for you as to the question of how you intend to handle the approach of ministers when they're asked a question about policy and then turn to a generalised attack on the previous government. There was a well understood practice. There was a well understood practice.
I can't hear the question.
There was a well understood practice under Speaker Smith in relation to questions which asked for an analysis of alternate policies. In all of the questions we've had today, there's been no attempt to even put in that line about alternate policies. It's simply been purportedly questions about the government's plan, but it seems that most ministers want to spend a lot of their time criticising the previous government. So I ask you, Mr Speaker, this is an important issue. How will you be handling that?
Just on that point, the Leader of the House.
To consider when you're looking back over question time the last couple of days, with respect to the numbers of points of order, whether or not there in fact is now a new point of order for relevance deprivation, because the number that we're getting is absurd.
Thank you to both the Manager and the Leader of the House. I will take that under consideration and report back to both of them.